here's a quick look into today's episode.
A few years ago, a couple of my West Point classmates and I co-founded a leadership blog called Thought to Action. We were trying to bring forward the lessons that we've learned through a lot of our failures or things that we just wish we had done better as more junior officers. Well, I think the quickest answer is 9/11. So I was in 7th grade. It was definitely the end of a little bit of my childhood innocence. I think it was a Time magazine article that had a suicide bomber, 17-year-old, somebody my age on the front of it. And it was an interview with him going through training camp about why he wanted to go be a suicide bomber and kill Americans. And for me, that was just fascinating, getting into the head of our enemy about what motivated them. And that's when I decided I wanted to go into the intelligence community, following my aunt and uncle's footsteps.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Today's conversation is with Brigid Hickman. When people talk about Brigid, the most common statement is, she is not just the best intelligence officer I know, she's possibly the best person. She is laser-focused, empathetic, and courageous enough to share her most challenging times in the Army and life with us here today. As someone who on the outside looks like she has everything figured out, on the inside she's just like us, trying to do our best, to lead with character, and to not let our teams down. And that's why people want her on their team. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Brigid Hickman.
I'm Brigid Hickman. I'm a MI major, currently serving as the 7th Group S2 down here at Camp Bull Simons, Florida. Before this, I was up in the Washington, D.C. area in the Bradley Fellowship, formerly known as the JCS internship. While there, I did a 1-year master's at Georgetown. I worked up at the Office of the Secretary of Defense level of the Pentagon, and then I worked my final year for Lieutenant General Potter when she was the Army G2. Prior to that, I was in the 173rd. Phenomenal assignment. That's where you and I got to meet back in First Rock. Was in the 101st as my first duty assignment coming out of West Point.
Give us a little bit of a spoiler, like what are some of the big things that we're going to talk about that have got you fired up, like right now, that got you the most excited, that you're working on, like right now, or that you just kind of released?
Yes. So I am passionate about writing and trying to mentor and communicate leadership through writing. A few years ago, a couple of my West Point classmates and I co-founded a leadership blog called Thought to Action. Definitely nothing fancy or sophisticated. It's very much a grassroots effort that we developed, but we gathered a team of some of our other friends who had published a few things in the past, or we just knew had really good ideas that needed to be codified and put out there. We bought the domain name. My classmate, Tara Middlebrooks, who's very technologically savvy and just very creative, took a bunch of classes on how to build a website. She got our website up and running, and we came up with a system where we try to publish twice a month on a rotational basis. And I guess main mantra of Thought to Action is we are trying to bring forward the lessons that we've learned through a lot of our failures or things that we just wish we had done better as more junior officers. And we all started this when we were in our broadening assignments. So whether it was graduate school or just working in the Pentagon where we had a little bit more time on our hands, that we decided we wanted to have this project as kind of a reflective effort on our company grade years as we get prepared to become majors and field grade officers in the Army. So we're hitting 3 years running right now. It's been a little bit harder to maintain in KD assignments than we thought. So we've decreased a little bit of our production just because life gets in the way of that. But most recently, we published an article in May that was geared towards newly commissioned second lieutenants with just a little bit of a summation of some of our favorite books, podcasts, movies, articles, and other resources that we found most helpful to us when we first commissioned, and then kind of getting us through platoon leader and company command times. In a nutshell, that's been my side project, pet hobby for the last 3 years, and something that I'm proud we've been able to maintain even as we've moved across the world and gone into KD assignments.
Thank you for summarizing that into so clearly into something simple, because I think you did a good job of summarizing what I what I'm also trying to do with the Teach Me to Fish podcast is helping people continue to go in the future. So I'm going to be a brigade commander. You're a brigade, you're a group S2. We're going to be able to continue these kind of conversations through KD as we're serving. Like, it's not wait till you're all done. And that's our spoiler alert. That's what we want to kind of talk about the most. Those thoughts for new leaders, we're going to weave into, your whole story. As we kind of take this plane off, tell us why you joined the Army in the first place. Like, why the Army, why West Point, and some of the people that drove you in that direction in the first place?
Well, I think the quickest answer is 9/11. Like so many of my peers and adjacent year groups, I was in 7th grade on that day. It was definitely the end of a little bit of my childhood innocence. At school, we learned about the attacks on the World Trade Center. I thought it was the Chicago Board of Trade, because I grew up outside Chicago. I didn't know anything about the World Trade Center. And then at the end of the school day, our principal announced that the Pentagon had gotten hit. And my aunt and uncle lived in Northern Virginia, had worked in the intelligence community. And in my head, if you weren't working in the White House or Capitol Hill, you were working in the Pentagon. So I was convinced that they had been killed. Thankfully, they weren't. But that kind of started the next several years of my life of, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. I go into high school and that's just all over the news. And I just felt this desire to serve my country. So I started volunteering at an organization called Operation Support Our Troops that sent care packages overseas to the troops, worked with a lot of Blue Star moms, worked with a lot of Vietnam veterans who volunteered there. And I would actually write letters to soldiers and put them in the boxes, and I would get replies back about what it was like serving over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and just kind of became fascinated with it. That was kind of the active part of it. And then as I'm reading the news on a fairly regular basis, I came across, I think it was a Time magazine article that had a suicide bomber, like 17-year-old, somebody my age, on the front of it. And it was an interview with him going through training camp about why he wanted to go be a suicide bomber and kill Americans. And for me, that was just fascinating, getting into the head of our enemy about what motivated them. And that's when I decided I wanted to go into the intelligence community, following my aunt and uncle's footsteps, but then working with the care packages and kind of corresponding with soldiers. I started thinking, well, what if I did intelligence through the Army? And a family friend of mine had been looking into West Point. So that kind of got me on the West Point rabbit hole. And I got a letter of assurance before my senior year started. My family and I went out there homecoming weekend when I was a senior, and I just fell in love with West Point. The tradition, the scenery, the campus, it was amazing. And I'd been in Catholic school my whole life, so uniforms and discipline weren't really an issue. And frankly, I was a little disappointed with my high school experience, just in terms of living up to the values that they espouse. I didn't really feel valued as a student there because I didn't meet, certain criteria of coming from a big donor family. I wasn't a legacy. I wasn't a star athlete. My college admissions advisor even asked me, like, what does West Point want with you? You're not an athlete. You're not one of our, top students here, which was fine. I mean, it just increased my desire to want to go there. So when I got to West Point, it was just a dream come true, as nerdy as that sounds. It just hit the aspirations that I had to be challenged, be with people that were oriented on the same goal as me. And it was very much nested in just what I was living through at that point in American history, too.
So then you get to West Point. Was it everything you expected going through those 4 years and getting MI and getting out to the big Army?
It was. I had a wonderful experience. I can't really remember a day or a point that I ever thought about quitting. I think I was just so driven once I got there, and I was just so humbled by my classmates, who a lot of them were, valedictorians, came from all these different backgrounds. And it was just fun. I had an awesome plebe year company. We made our own fun, of course, because we couldn't do a whole lot else. Colonel Matt Harbin was one of my plebe year professors, and he was just an awesome first example of what an Army officer should be. So I thrived academically. I just loved being in the classroom. I made the lacrosse team, which was club back then, but that gave me a great group of girls that I'm still very, very close with, gave me a chance to travel, get out of drill as a plebe, kind of all those good benefits that you're looking for. And I didn't really deter from wanting to branch MI at all, maybe up until like a few days before branch night, where I was wondering, should I go be an aviator? Should I go be an engineer? But ultimately stuck with what I'd been settled on since high school. And I'm so glad that I did, because I've absolutely loved being an intelligence officer in the Army.
Yeah. And being somebody that has served with you for a long, when you've been serving as long as we have, and you see this in some of your soldiers, you know instantly when someone's doing what they're called to do. And it was clear, like even when you were a captain, like this is what you were supposed to be doing. This is how you were supposed to be doing it with. Like the things that were most important, they came it looked like you were doing them with ease. You know, I know it wasn't with ease, but you looked like you were doing it with ease. And it was like, it just makes people want to be around you, want to trust you, want to believe what you have to say, because, you know, you can see it. It's so genuine in why you're doing it. So then you leave West Point and you head out to the Army, the actual Army, and you get out to some of your first units. How was the expectations of like what you expected when you get there versus how it turned out to be?
So it was definitely different. West Point, I felt like the sky was the limit. It was definitely the leadership laboratory that it had been advertised as. And I picked the 101st because I was totally sold on Band of Brothers. I wanted to go be Lewis Nixon, be an infantry battalion S2, and just live up the legacy of the 101st. I show up to 2nd Brigade. I spent a few weeks up in the Brigade S2 shop. And I learned, I would be going to the Special Troops Battalion, to the MI Company, or I'd probably go to the Logistics Battalion and be in their S2 shop, because they hadn't fully made the transition to women being able to serve in combat arms units, which was fine. I wasn't super upset about that. I was just happy to be in the 101st. So I wind up going to the Logistics Battalion, which I was a little disappointed with, not because it was a logistics battalion, it was just the culture of the unit early on. But I had a great captain, Battalion S2, who is kind of like a Bailey Concannon. She was like 5'2", 120 pounds. She actually won the 101st Airborne Division Combatives competition herself, and she was a long distance runner. So she took me under her wing. We PT'd hard. There were a lot of other great captains on staff in that battalion. And we got kind of a short notice deployment alert to be the first security force advise and assist brigade. So this was in the fall of 2011, when our brigade was going to go just field those advisory teams and then work under a separate brigade that was a battle space owner. And this came down about 12 months sooner than we were supposed to deploy. So I was really happy, thinking, oh, great, I'm going to get to go to Afghanistan sooner than I thought. But they really only pulled people for those deployment, or for those advisory teams who had previously deployed, with the thought process being, we want people who've been forward in Afghanistan, have worked with the Afghan army. It'll just be a shorter learning curve to go over there and advise. So I wasn't able to get on that deployment. I was really disappointed and upset at first, pouted for a couple days and said, well, I will make a to-do list of all the things I'm going to do while I'm on Rear D to get better. So I just chipped away at all of those, going to air assault school, trying to maintain my proficiency in Arabic, because I had studied that at West Point. I just had a bunch of other professional goals that I wanted to hit. And then a few months later, I get an email from the Brigade S2 saying that 3rd Ranger Battalion was having their intel officer come to Campbell to recruit people to go on their deployment to Afghanistan. And I emailed back and said, well, is that something I'd be allowed to do? I'm a 2nd lieutenant. I wasn't sure who all they would be taking. And he said, nope, just show up at this place, this time, bring your ORB, which all it had on there was my college degree and my air assault wings. It was very bare. And I said, okay, I'm just going to go. So I walk into the room, and it's Captain Ben Hopper standing there doing the interview. And we just get to talking, find out we're both from the Midwest. We're both Chicago Blackhawks fans. He asked me a bunch of questions about why I want to deploy. And a month later, he called back and said, we would love to take you with. If your brigade will support it, we'll bring you down so you can see kind of the platoon ex-evals, and then we'll bring you down for some intel training afterwards. My battalion commander was 100% on board at first. He said, well, if you want to deploy, we can find a way to bring you forward here. But I was lucky that my brigade commander, Colonel Dan Walrath, had been 375's battalion commander, and said, if they want to take anybody from my brigade, they're 100% going to go, because that'll be valuable experience that they can bring back. For me, a perfect example of just God's hand at work in your life, where he closes one door and opens a window. And if he says, no, not right now to something at first, it's because he's got something much better in store for you. And I wound up driving down to then Fort Benning on September 11th, 2012, to go start my training with the Ranger Regiment. So, looking over the course of 11 years from that pivotal moment when I was in seventh grade to actually embarking upon my pre-deployment training with one of the most elite units in our Army, for me was just kind of an incredible trajectory, and something I still have to, pinch myself that I had the opportunity to do that. And that deployment with the Rangers was phenomenal. I worked with some great leaders, like then Major Teddy Kleisner was our task force commander. Then Major Jeremiah Hurley was my J3. Then Captain Pete Lozinski was my OPSO, who was the one that inspired me to want to go to the 173rd. Then Colonel Todd Brown was the task force J3 at like the echelon above us. So just all of these great leaders that I got surrounded by as a young second lieutenant. I got promoted to first lieutenant on that deployment. Really just showed me what right looked like, how to be a professional, how to target, how intel drives operations, working with interagency reps and partners over there. That set me up for success to then want to go to the maneuver career course, because all of them said, hey, that's the best career course you can go to. And if you want to be an infantry battalion S2, which had then become an option for me with a change in Army policy, the best thing you can do to prepare to be an infantry battalion S2 is to go to the maneuver career course. And then once I got there, they all helped me try to get my letters of introduction to go into the 173rd. And I just feel like I've been probably the biggest beneficiary of the Abrams Charter, because at every step of my career, I've had Ranger Regiment guys, serving in leadership roles and mentors. And even my current group commander right now, Colonel Nelson, was the DCO at Ranger Regiment a few years ago. So I guess I can't get away from them, but I'm definitely glad that I keep running into all of them at every assignment that I hit.
A lot of times it's those special opportunities, it's those special little things that are in between the lines on your ORB. It's not just the unit that you served in, it's all the little things in between. It's the relationships. I've got a list going right now of all the people that you're naming. These are all the people that are connecting one unit to the next unit to the next unit to the next unit. It's the relationships. The two questions I get the most in my life: how do I get through Ranger School, and how do I get to the Ranger Regiment? 30 years in the Army, I get that question. If I don't get it every single day from somebody in the Army, some way, shape, or form, I get it the next day. And the answer is through relationships. Because relationships, if you surround yourself with people that are going to help you get physically fit, mentally strong, and be prepared, you're going to get through Ranger School. And then two, how do I get to the Ranger Regiment, or how do I get to be a part of that? Through relationships. Well, what do you mean? Is that because they're going to vouch for you? Yes, they're going to teach you all the right things. Yes, they're going to watch out for you and help you get that next assignment. They're going to make sure that you get that experience. They get you on that training exercise. They tell you what this is what got them to be where they're at today. And so that's how they mentor you. They say, you need to go do this thing. You need to go try this. You need to get in touch with this person. And so relationships become, the way that you progress, not just in the Army, but absolutely in life. And so then you show up, and then you get picked. It's probably starting to be a little bit of a pattern at this point, which is like people are recommending you, and now it becomes this snowball effect, right? It's starting, and you probably don't recognize it when you're in the middle of it, but this snowball effect is starting to happen for you. And then you show up to the 173rd, which is a pretty good unit, right? Charlie Shields, I think if I can get it right, the way he said it is he's like, yep, the 173rd is like a cult, and I'm Jim Jones, and I'm the one making the Kool-Aid. So you make it out there to this organization, and how was the expectations of getting out there, and how were things maybe different or the same, a lot of the same, in the 173rd?
Yes, it was, for me, a wonderful experience. And kind of backtracking to the relationships piece. So obviously Colonel Brown was going out there to take 2503. My battalion commander at Fort Campbell, Rob Cannell, knew the guy who was the BSTB commander in the 173rd, because again, they were both Green Berets. But I'm also telling, then Captain Ben Hopper about this. And he said, well, my best friend is about to go be the Brigade S2 out there. Why don't I introduce you to him? So that was how I got introduced to Nick Goshen. And when I was at Benning for the maneuver career course, Nick Goshen came down to do some liaising with Ranger Regiment. And we actually did an in-person interview for the job because he was willing to do a by name request. This was before the AIM marketplace. So we met in the library down there, did an interview, and by the end of it, he said, well, I want you on my team, but go back, talk to your parents, make sure, they're cool with you moving halfway around the world. Because I had said, I'm not married. My parents and my brother are my family, and, love them to death. And as a single soldier, I always wanted to make sure I, was running stuff by my folks, that they were cool with me leaving the country and stuff like that. So just the fact that he took that into consideration said so much about his character and his leadership, that he knew as a young 25-year-old, that was going to be a huge step for me. He was also from the Midwest, super close with his parents, and he got that. And my parents were a little surprised. They said, okay, whatever. My dad had just retired. They were planning on doing a bunch of stuff to the house, and said, we'll just put that money towards going to visit you in Europe, which they did. They came over probably a dozen times, and it was a blast. So I get over to Italy, immediately go work for then Major Nick Goshen as his assistant brigade S2. And everything I learned at the maneuver career course just set me up for success. The brigade had gone through a couple transition periods. I got there in September 2015. So it had been about a year since Russia invaded Crimea. This whole kind of Lisco date scenario transition was starting to happen. And our brigade was going to be going to Hohenfeld's, the Joint Multinational Readiness Training Center, in April. So within the course of about 7 months, this brigade that had been doing just counterinsurgency, had a lot of Ranger Regiment guys that were just like direct action raids, con ops, figuring out how do we maneuver a whole brigade against a near peer enemy. So coming in with a really solid doctrinal foundation from the career course, kind of understanding, the Ranger mindset a little bit from that first deployment, I was just ready to get to work. And Colonel Goshen was so good at putting out guidance. We had a great intel team that we were really able to get online with what he wanted, what the brigade commander, then Colonel Greg Anderson, wanted us to do. Had a great brigade XO, then Major Don Neal. Major Howell was the brigade S3. So I just kind of fell in with this cast of characters, but we had a great group of captains up at brigade as well. So for 9 months, we planned everything for JRTC, did just MDMP after MDMP in the jock up there, sometimes staying till like 8 o'clock on Friday nights, just trying to get it right, doing all these interim steps to try to get ready, because we generally knew, the terrain, you can never do enough terrain analysis. And we generally knew what the enemy was going to be, and that we'd either fight west to east or east to west. So just every week we were kind of doing a different iteration of that. And then the exercise came. We burned in some Humvees, which I know was like the worst day of Don Neal's life. Is the Brigade XO.
I just finished the solo course. And when they did the conversation about investigations, that WTF film was the how many investigations came out of this video right here.
Yep. Yes. So one of the Army's finer moments right there. Yeah. But that was a great exercise. We learned a ton. Like, our planning definitely paid off. And for me, never having been in an airborne unit, just going through the motions of what does it mean to do intel on the ground, where like you're just jumping in with a map and your radio, and you hope you're able to talk to the other airborne command posts across the way, wherever they are. Just a lot of good fundamental lessons on soldiering, war fighting, just the basics of being an intel professional. And then right after that exercise, I got the word I was going down to First Rock. And luckily, out of like 5 of us captains that were up at brigade, 4 of us went down to 1503. Greg Berry, Greg DiRosario, Ed Carrazzo, and me. Tony Formica had to go to 2503. So just being able to show up to a new unit with that group that I had grown so close with, like we all knew how to operate and work together. And specifically Greg DiRosario as the FSO, like he was one of my best friends over there in Italy. And I think that came through in our work, just with how our soldiers interacted. We had really great intel fires integration, which for me, that was the funnest part of being a battalion S2, was being able to get all my soldiers talking to his sisters, and everything was just aligned across the board. And we just had so much talent in that battalion. I think that's still my favorite job that I've had, besides the one that I'm in right now. I love being a company commander in the MICO in the 173rd, but there was just something really special about what we had in First Rock, and, being able to be that trusted advisor of the commander, helping out the companies with whatever they needed intel wise. And, we went back to Hohenfeld's at least once a quarter to do another CTC rotation up there. So we got pretty good at what we were doing, even if it was just an exercise land like that. It was really fulfilling, but also almost made me want to get out of the Army at the same time, because the op tempo was just crazy. And this was after you left, sir. It would have been probably around like Thanksgiving 2017. We'd just been going really, really hard. I was starting to get a little bit homesick, the headstrong 26-year-old who thought she could move halfway around the world on her own and be totally fine. Reality was starting to catch up that, it was just hard staying on top of cleaning and laundry and things like that. And, having those questions about, well, I do want to get married one day. I do want to have a family one day. Obviously there's a dating population within the 173rd, but that, never worked out super great. So I was just asking myself a lot of questions, about what do I want my life to look like, and kind of came to a determination over Thanksgiving that year that I wanted to get out of the Army and go to law school, do something like that, and move back home. So I went into Colonel Wagner's office and told him that. He was surprised. Major Worthen, the XO after you, he was really surprised. I'd been on the list to take the MICO next and pulled myself off of that and said, no, I plan to drop a refrad packet. They respected my decision, kind of tried to talk me out of it a little bit, but at that point in time, that's what my heart was set on. I went home for Christmas, kind of decompressed a little bit, and then I came back and found out that Nick Goshen had put me in for this like Intel award back in Washington, D.C., which I didn't even know it was a thing, but apparently he put it in because another peer of mine, Lacey Enyart, who was in the INSCOM brigade in Vicenza, had seen the posting for it and sent it to Colonel Goshen and said, hey, I think this is something Brigid would be a good candidate for. And I didn't know she did that until after he died, and we were, just trading stories back and forth. Because of that award, he put together this week-long trip to D.C. where we went to every three-letter intel agency, went into the Army G2 and the Pentagon. And it was just such a nice break from the craziness of everything else that we had been doing, and gave me an insight into what I could do beyond the 173rd, what I could do post KD, that there is this broader intelligence community that we're a part of. Just taking the time to show me, here's how you network, here's how you build these relationships, and really giving me kind of the self-esteem boost that I needed, and it wasn't just that I got an award. It was the fact that like he took the time to write this, vet it through the brigade commander, vetted it all the way up through the UCOM J2, who was then Colonel Laura Potter before she became the Army G2, who I'd eventually work for. I'd say between coming back from Christmas and February. I ate crow, decided I wanted to stay in the Army, tried to get back on the list for company command, which fortunately Colonel Wagner was able to go to bat for me, and I wound up getting selected to still take command even after taking my name off the list and saying that I didn't want to do it. But yeah, I just mentioned all that because like there have definitely been points that I wanted to throw in the towel, that I just felt so burned out. My soldiers were kind of starting to get miserable, and there was only so long that I could just go keep telling them, hey, everything's going to be fine. Like, we're going to get a break. We're going to get a break. And at least in my head, it didn't seem like that break was going to come at that point in time. But like leaders stepping in at the right moment and just letting me know, hey, you're valued. You've got a future. We see the potential in you. It's okay that you feel exhausted and burned out right now. Like, just take a little bit of a break and we'll find a way to kind of let up on the gas. And, Colonel Anderson even brought me into his office as well. So like the brigade commander sitting down with the captain and saying, hey, I heard you're just not feeling super great, about life, about the Army, like, tell me what's going on. And he gave me like 45 minutes of his time just to sit in his office and tell him, here is what, the pressure of our schedule and op tempo kind of feels like at the lowest level. And I knew my soldiers were unhappy, as I had mentioned, and I just felt like I was beyond my capacity as a battalion S2 and as a captain to kind of alleviate some of that for them. And I think he valued that feedback. I definitely valued the opportunity just to sit down and talk to him about it. That's something that always remains at the forefront of my mind, especially with our, retention issues that we have right now. There's a lot of captains in my unit that are refratting for various reasons. And I just try to be cognizant of the fact that maybe they just need that one more opportunity. Maybe they just need that office call for somebody to listen. And I've been there before, and I think it gives me a little bit of perspective and understanding that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I hadn't felt like I was kind of at the bottom of the barrel at those points in time.
I want to go into that a little bit because that's got my head spinning, what you just said about the op tempo and how it was driving you towards considering, getting out, and the things that Colonel Anderson did and brought you in and listen. That was a commander that was like, hey, if I got one of my best people saying I'm about to get out, like what was it about the op tempo? Was it people not saying no to anything, like just adding everything to the calendar? What were those things like, so that we as leaders, because now we are they, right? We are the senior leaders, and senior leaders are listening, because a lot of this same stuff is starting to happen. People don't realize they take command. They go in as the CSM. They take responsibility of a brigade, a Group S2 shop, and those, as Charlie Shields just said, those horses have been running hard for the last 2 years. And you're a fresh jockey coming in, and you're like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to crack the whip. I'm ready to make some changes. I'm ready to inspire people to go do phenomenal things. And they're smoked. And he said, don't be afraid to let that horse go to the barn for a little bit every once in a while and get a little bit of rest. But that's what the people think. They think, this is my only shot as a leader. This is my chance. People want to be inspired. They want to go do great things. But sometimes what they need is 2 weeks. And I'm not saying 2 weeks off. You didn't say 2 weeks off. You said 2 weeks to do something different, to go to Washington, D.C., and to go see all those different agencies and to see this. It's not just go home for the weekend. It was go home and see your mom and dad. It was be around friends. It wasn't let's jam it in with a ball, and then we're going to do unit PT, and then we're going to do 3 LPDs, and then we're going to go to the field and do best ranger competition, and like that. That's not a break. That's kind of what I want to get into in here a little bit.
Yes. And a lot of this was even stuff that was outside of the brigade commander's control. But, Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. EUCOM's whole directive was make 30,000 look like 300,000. So exercises and just being busy was kind of the operating environment that we were in. The enhanced forward presence got signed in the summer of 2016, I think it was. So 2nd Battalion went up and took over Operation Atlantic Resolve in the Balkans. I know 191 had done some stuff over in Ukraine. So really the only maneuver battalion left to absorb all of these multinational training exercises and whatever else was 1503. That compounded with the fact that we were very limited on what training we could do in Italy. I'm sure as you remember, right, you couldn't do more than a squad live fire in Italy just because of ammo restrictions and things like that. So anytime we would go up to Germany, it would be a 4 to 6 week endeavor of trying to hit live fire progression, trying to hit participating either as a battalion, staff, and company in some sort of rotation at Hohenfels. It just seemed like, it was 4 weeks on, 6 weeks off, whatever it was, that there was just kind of this crazy cycle of requirements and being away from home. And then, of course, you're in Europe, right? So you want to travel. And I think I probably burned myself out a little bit trying to see too much of the continent on my weekends and then come back to crazy weeks. And it just felt like there wasn't an end in sight, even though there was, of course, right? But it just seemed like every week we were just slugging through more and more and more. And I was able to absorb some of that, but it was seeing, my shop just kind of person by person start to drop off in terms of happiness, performance levels, things like that, it just reached that fever pitch for me in November of 2017, I think it was, that I was just ready to say, all right, done with the Army. Like, if this is my future, I don't think I want to be doing that. And, you look up at your majors as a captain, you look up at the battalion commanders, and you're kind of looking for indications like, hey, are they feeling the way I am? Are they, kind of as miserable as I am? And, leaders being good leaders are going to try to put on, a good face of everything and say, hey, I can handle this, whatever it is. I think I just felt a little more alone in feeling like I was the only one who was overwhelmed. And for me, I just took that as a sign of maybe, this is where I've capped out at the Army. But once I vocalized that, all my leaders sort of coalesced. Like I said, battalion commander immediately wanted to chat and like check in to see what was happening. Brigade commander wanted to check in and see what happened. And like the first weekend actually that I just felt really overwhelmed by that. I was just not having a good day, like didn't want to leave my apartment. And I actually wound up calling Nick Goshen, like crying, just saying, I'm like so unhappy right now, so overwhelmed. Like, I just want to go home, or like, I want my mom to fly out here. And he said, well, where are you at right now? And I said, I'm at my apartment. And he said, okay, I want you to pack a bag. This is like a Saturday morning. Megan and I are going to come pick you up, and you're going to spend the rest of the weekend at our house. Like, I wasn't in a position where I was going to do anything to harm myself or anything. I was just like so overwhelmed with everything that I felt like was going on. So they came and picked me up, brought me back to their place. He went out to go like watch football with a bunch of the other, majors and stuff. And Megan and I just talked, and I was just able to unload everything. We made homemade pizza that night, like watched a chick flick. He eventually came back home. Like they put me up in their guest room. We made pancakes the next morning. Like, they had told me to bring my laundry if I needed to do laundry over at their house. It was just this little getaway of kind of being with, the family that I had there, and him just realizing, okay, there's somebody who just needs to be brought into the fold right now. That did, so much just to at least set me up to go back into work that next week, not feeling like I was totally defeated and everything else. So I was just really lucky that I had the leaders that I did, because I think any other organization, perhaps they could have just said, all right, well, you're not cut out for it. Like, cool, put your refrad, pack it in, and get yourself back to the States.
Thank you for like laying that out and saying what some of those people did, because for those of us that have made a lot of mistakes, or people that have been through tough times, and then they've had leaders that kind of demonstrated how to get through it. Now you have an example when you can identify these things when you have leaders that work with you or for you. And he saw that. So somebody had done similar for Nick at some point in his career where he was struggling, and he was feeling overwhelmed and not sure if he could continue to do it. And he had people that he could lean on, right? So he learned, and then he's like, he could see it from a mile away. And he's like, this is how we do it. This way, it seemed so deliberate. Pack a bag, come over to the house. This is how we're going to do it. Bring your laundry. And now you're doing the same thing. So someone's going to, junior officer, NCO, someone's going to look at you, and you're going to say, I know exactly what to do. Or you're going to tell First Sergeant, hey, this is what you need to do. Sergeant Major, this is how we handle this situation. And people are like, well, how did you know that? Somebody did it for me. Somebody helped me get through a tough time. So thanks for sharing how those people helped you, because I feel like we're in a very similar situation right now with the middle of our population. It's the people that have done a few years, that have been going really hard. They're in their third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh year in the Army. And they're like, wow, is there any end in sight? And then you got maybe some senior people that are maybe a little bit not thinking about it and saying, what? This is just the way it always is. If this is the way it's always going to be, if we're running on a red line, if we're running at 88,000 RPMs right now, and we're not even at war, what's going to happen when we are? Like if this is supposed to be the in-between time, and you're like, well, this is an in-between time, it's going to be hard. We got to make sure that there is no war. Good luck telling that to the population that have been doing 7 or 8 years, And I felt very similar. Like when I was on my fifth year of being deployed, I mean, that all happened in an 8-year time span, deployed for 5 years out of 8. Tell that to Ryan and Hunter and Brady and Christy. So then talk us through like picking up and moving from Italy back to the mainland in your career and then in your life.
Yes, and when I left Italy, I still wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in the Army or not. I knew I didn't want to get out in Italy because I'd seen people do that, and it just made the whole process a lot harder. And I figured I had, a year or two before I would potentially promote to major and would need to go to ILE. So my goal was to just try to get to a place that if I did decide to transition out, it would be easier to do so. I had actually tried to get back to Chicago to teach ROTC. That fell through. So I picked Washington, D.C. My aunt and uncle still lived there, had a lot of friends on the East Coast, and I'd always wanted to live in D.C. I've just been fascinated by history my whole life. And so I went into the Pentagon, into the Army G2, essentially did intel staff duty for a year on the G2 watch floor. So it's a 24-hour office that works with the Army Operations Center, and we basically just monitor all global events and crises and produce the daily read book for all the Army senior leaders. So Sec Army all the way down to the G everybody, all the 2 stars on the Army staff. So that really exposed me to a lot more strategic intelligence and knowing executive level intel products and then what these senior leaders need to digest on a daily basis to, maintain their situational awareness and then make decisions. So that was fascinating because in the summer of 2019, when I was there, it was a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. So there was always something interesting happening, in the Strait of Hormuz or Gulf of Aden, or, that was really the beginning of their one-way attack UAVs into Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. And then Kim Jong-un was shooting off missiles almost every time I was on shift. It kind of became a joke that he must have known I was on duty that day. So there were a lot of times I had to call the Army G2 at 2 and 3 in the morning and wake him up because something had hit CCIR criteria, and we're helping draft the email that he's going to send up to the Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army. So I immediately go from just being a company commander over in Italy to kind of operating at the level, where stuff that we were reading and analyzing was having a bigger impact. So that was just really fulfilling. And it was also great because it was 4 days on, 4 days off, the way that our team cycled through. So I was able to hit all the Smithsonian museums, think tank lectures, just all of these fun things on my off time. And it was really the decompression that I needed after being over in Italy. And at the end of 2019 is when I met my husband. We actually met online on the Catholic Match website app. I was working nights, so I figured if I was going to meet anybody, it's probably not going to happen when I'm on night shift. So let me at least kind of neck down the population to somebody who shares my faith and values ostensibly. We just connected on there because I saw he was a West Point graduate. He had lived over in Italy the same time that I did, studying down in Rome. So yeah, we, went out for a few dates and decided we really liked each other and just kept hanging out and everything. And then he'd been living in Richmond at the time, which is where he grew up, and eventually moved up to Arlington, Virginia, and got a job as an Army civilian working on Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. So we both lived in Arlington, about a mile from each other. We're able to do runs and bike rides, all over Arlington, all the way across the river into DC and the National Mall. And we did a lot of that once COVID hit. So we were dating for about 4 months when the world shut down. And I remember people saying, oh, are you guys just not going to see each other anymore or break up because, you can't be with each other in person? And we said, absolutely not. We live in a state and, near DC that has just beautiful parks and outdoor areas. So we took advantage of all of those, went to every Civil War battlefield in the area that we could go to because those were still open and open air. And we got engaged in October 2021 and then married in July 2022. So we're coming up on 2 years of being married. And yes, he's, my best friend, my favorite person in my life, and makes me a better Army officer, just knowing that I've got somebody at home, who loves and supports me that much, and was also an Army officer himself. He was an infantry officer for 5 years, served in Korea in the 82nd. So just us having that shared understanding and, West Point experience, it's just great having someone at home that I can kind of bounce, ideas, challenges off of, and he's got that same understanding of what life in the Army is like.
It's hard to explain to people that are not married or younger how much of a game changer that is when you find the right person to help you in life and then in the Army. Talk about the Army side of having somebody that you can lean on, that somebody that is a teammate that you didn't have before, that maybe leads to the overwhelming and the not sure I want to continue to do this.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is just on the practical level of not coming home to an empty house, having somebody who is meeting you at home or is already there by the time that you get home, to share a meal with, to do whatever chores around the house together, and that's not all solely on your plate. Just being able to help each other in that regard. Part of why I felt so overwhelmed in Italy was, not being able to hit the grocery store or commissary when it was open. I don't want to say running out of food like I was starving, but like eating tuna and oatmeal for a lot of meals because, I couldn't keep up with grocery shopping to have like fresher food in the house, or the super energy efficient laundry machines in Italy that it would take literally all weekend just to do like 2 loads of laundry. Now, like obviously I'm back in the States, easier to do laundry, but like I've got somebody who helps with that, or, if I just need to vent at the end of the day, I've got somebody, who cares deeply about me, who can hear about that. And yeah, I think just having, that stronger love, like knowing, hey, I'm in my vocation now as a wife, has helped me peel back from certain things in the Army as well. Like I won't stay at work as late, just doing stuff that can wait till tomorrow, because now I want to get home and have dinner with my husband and, take our dog for a walk or whatever it might be. So it's helped me, I think, rightly order things in my life in a way that I didn't have before, because I didn't really have that forcing function. It was easy for me just to fall into the trap of putting work first ahead of healthier habits and other things like that. So he's definitely been a good counterbalance for that. He's an avid runner on his own. So even days where I'm feeling a little bit more sluggish, like, oh, I don't know if I want to go out for a run or bike ride, he's going. So I can just hop on my bike and try to chase after him as he's doing, a 16-mile run or whatever he's got on his training plan for that day.
Yeah, I think it's important for leaders to hear that, or to start to demonstrate that, because if you think I'm going to push all these things off while I'm in a leadership position, or I'm going to not do those things, I'm going to put work first. I'm going to stay here and do everything that was due today, but I'm also going to do all the things that are due tomorrow. That you start to you start redline yourself. The RPMs start going up. You're doing it to yourself, but then you're doing it to everybody that's around you. Like no one in their right mind is going to go home when you're sitting in your office, clicking and still cranking things out and working through things and asking questions. Like they're going to be there because they want to help support you as part of the team, right? And you don't realize you're doing it until you blow a gasket, until something breaks, or somebody on your team breaks, and they why didn't they come in today? Because they couldn't do it anymore. They were just exhausted, or they were just, it was just too much for them, and you didn't realize you were doing it. You're like, because they did have a family at home, or they did have a wife or husband at home, or kids that were sick, and they needed to come in late. They needed to drop, to do something for their family, but they didn't feel like they could ask you, because you were always at work. You were never doing something like that. But as soon as they start to see you do those things as a family, or as a normal human, as a normal person, I think then they say, okay, well now we get to follow their lead, or we get to do things. So you're demonstrating for your people how to have some type of normalcy in your life, and then even not because you spend less time. Well, you don't have to spend more time at work to be more effective and to get more things done. And so ever since I started wanting to get out of there, needing to get home, needing to get to the kids, needing to get to the boys, I had to get to the kids' practice. It has forced me to focus on what's most important and to get things done, and to get them done in a timely fashion, so that I didn't just leave the computer wide open, when I left.
Right. I think it forces efficiency and delegation as well. And that's something for me with the jump from becoming a captain to a major, focusing on those things that only I can do, and empowering the leaders below me to take on some of those tasks. Trust but verify, like Reagan used to say, like have enough touch points where you can spot check along the way, but delegate down, empower them, give your good guidance up front, get a confirmation brief from them, and then let them move out on it. And that way I can leave work at work, and when I'm home, I'm home. And that was something my husband lovingly kind of corrected me on when I was in ILE. We got done with class at noon, and we had just gotten our golden retriever puppy. So of course I just want to come home and play with the dog. And then I'm finally starting my homework, at 5 or 6 o'clock, and I just string it out over the course of several hours that night. So I was home, but not really home, because it was taking me forever to do my work. So he mentioned that after the first couple of weeks and said, hey, you've got your books open, you've got like the dog in your lap, and then, before we know it, it's like time to go to bed. So I changed the habit of just staying after class, getting all my reading, all my homework done right there, and I could knock it all out within like 60 to 90 minutes. And then I could go home and just totally be with my husband and with our puppy and enjoy a beautiful Northern Virginia summer. And now it's kind of the same way. Like I may have to answer an email or something at night, but I try to get to a good point that I'm comfortable leaving, come in the next day and just not worry about it once I leave. I've realized how important it is to model that good behavior. So like if I didn't have majors when I was a captain that were able to unplug at 5, they weren't sending emails and texts late at night. If they needed to work late, like just save the email as a draft and hit send in the morning. I remember sometimes I would come in, and this was after you left, and like I would have emails that people from the brigade were sending at like 9 and 10 o'clock, even 11 o'clock at night. Like they'd bring their laptop home, hop on the VPN and just continue to nug and work. And that just creates kind of this angst and anxiety, I think, that you feel like you always have to be on. And well, okay, if I'm not doing that, am I behind? Am I missing on something? Should I be working that hard? And especially for like captains and lieutenants, they do not need to be seeing that type of stuff, because that is what is going to make them think that next rank is just repugnant and they don't want to stay in to do that. So that's something I've been reflecting on a lot more now that I'm hitting kind of a year in a KD job is, am I modeling the right behavior for these captains, lieutenants, E7s, that as they decide, do I want to rise up to that next rank, who and that inspiration you kind of work with on a daily level will determine to some degree, right? There's of course other factors that people get out besides just thinking, oh, it's miserable to be a major. But with those little things that I can control, that's what I try to focus on.
If you could think for a second, here about some of the misconceptions about some of the things that you just said. And the misconceptions is that I don't send any emails once I leave work at 1700, and I don't send text messages to the people. The misconception is you don't work as hard. I'm working harder than you because I'm doing emails at 10 o'clock at night. So therefore, I'm working harder than you. I'm more dedicated than you. The other misconception is I get more work done than you. Like I'm getting more stuff done. Like I'm sending more emails. I'm sending more text messages. I'm doing more things. You can see it all, right? I'm doing more than you are doing. I'm getting more done. The things I'm doing are more important because they're coming at you all the time. So it's got to be more important. Let's break down some of those misconceptions, right? Those things that people think, it sounds great, but I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna do what you're doing. You can go home at 1700, and I support you, but I'm gonna look down upon you. How do we break down some of that? And you're like, come on, Matt, like serious. Let's be serious now. No, I am being serious. What are your thoughts on any of those misconceptions?
No, I think it's accurate as you described it, sir. And yeah, I think we can look at, what are the fruits of all of that is the result of feeling like you constantly have to be on the hook, like yielding higher performance, higher results or not. I think that level of engagement is just not sustainable over time. And I think some people too, like maybe just don't know a better way to do it, or they don't know that they are operating at that pace and scale that's just not sustainable. I think back actually to one kind of really unique exercise that Major Shannon Worthen, your successor as the XO in 1503, did with us on one of our 6-week-long forays up into Germany. Usually when the companies were out training, the staff was planning for the next thing. And he had us all, after our staff sync in the morning, we would rotate every day. Somebody would talk through kind of how they organized their day and then how they structured their notebook. And the intent of this little exercise was just to get different examples of how people kind of organize and structure their days and thoughts. And it was really fascinating because some people were addicted to OneNote, or they had these other computer programs, or they wanted everything digital. Some people preferred everything analog in their notebook, and just what your routine is from, waking up, PT, hygiene, whatever, and just seeing how people divided their time was really cool to gain some insights. And we were all able to trade best practices. I think leaders just taking the time to pause and do stuff like that kind of help people see themselves of, wow, maybe I am being inefficient. Maybe, my life isn't as rightly ordered as it should be in terms of leaving work at work, focus on the family, or even if you don't have a family, you need that time to reset at the end of the day. You need to, if you're trying to find somebody to date, you should probably make yourself available for dates during the week or at least on the weekend. So I think, again, it just goes back to leaders kind of modeling that good behavior. And if you've got majors that are burning it like that, I would expect battalion command teams and like the brigade command team to say, hey man, you kind of need to cool it and knock it off, because I'm not impressed by you sending emails at all hours of the day and things like that. And I think our senior NCOs can be good checks on that too. Of sometimes just industriousness maybe is indicative of some lack of confidence or like insecurity, maybe, I don't know. And I feel like senior NCOs just have a really good way of keying in on that and saying like, hey, sir, ma'am, you can let the foot off the gas a little bit. Like, you're doing fine. Everybody thinks you're a good leader. Like, that stuff can wait till tomorrow. So I've always had NCOs like kind of help rein me in if I'm ever getting to that point and saying, hey, it's, getting close to 1800. Like, what are you still working on? And just trying to help shoo us out the door. I think officers tend to need that a lot more than we'll admit.
Yeah. And when you say it's like not sustainable, some people still, a misconception is I can sustain it. And I only have to sustain it for 2 years, because or 1 year. I'm going to be doing this for a year. I can sustain this pace. But the thing that they don't recognize is that when you're running at that many RPMs and you're skipping PT or you're skipping eating healthy, your health is starting to deteriorate. You're starting to become short with people. You're starting to be rude. You're starting to be a jerk. You're not thinking 100% clearly. Maybe you're not sleeping as much. Your decisions are usually not 100%. You're not thinking. You're not thinking about the other person on the other end of that request. And then the final thing is like when you're doing all this stuff, you send me this email that's like 3 or 4 wheels of, and it's like, I don't have time to read that whole thing. A good email is, hey, sir, we got 3 things that we need to do. Here's the response. And it's no rolls of the wheel. And all you have to do is give them a thumbs up. It's done. It's completed staff work, our favorite document. All I had to do was give a thumbs up. It's not, hey, thanks. Here's 17 attachments and 14 different bullets. You gave me all the information, 0 analysis, and no recommended way ahead. And so I can't thumbs up or thumbs down to this. That's not good staff work. Is not helping your commander. It's not impressive to me. I won't speak on behalf of everybody. I'm not impressed by it. Now you're a field grade. Now you're down there in 7th group. What's kind of got you thinking about the future? Those things that you're saying, okay, I have figured these things out, and this is what I'm coaching my people through right now. I'm coaching my captains through this. Bailey Concannon, this is what I'm telling her. This is what she's crushing. I'm stealing things from her, even as me. I'm stealing things from her, and then the people like her, and I'm trying to replicate them into my life. As you kind of go forward, and you're giving out this advice to lots of different audiences, people with families, people without families, junior officers, junior NCOs, right? Other peers, other field grades, and your commanders. What's kind of on your mind about the next few years that you're super excited about?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time in our Army right now. And I think the reasons I think that are reasons a lot of other people may be frustrated with it, of, these inner warriors, as General Ferguson, the 1st Special Forces commander likes to call them. But being, a student of history and somebody who likes to continue to nerd out on military history, our country's been here before, our Army's been here before. I mean, if you look at where Dwight Eisenhower, George Marshall, George Patton, Omar Bradley were, post-World War I. Eisenhower never got to combat in World War I. Marshall was over there, but essentially a staff officer. Patton obviously did have a lot of combat, but like, how did these leaders who went on to, be some of the most consequential leaders and decision makers that we had in the 20th century, how were they spending their time in that interwar period? Well, they were innovating, they were experimenting, with these new things called tanks, these new things called airplanes, how they were going to be using aerial reconnaissance for intelligence development and things like that. And they obviously didn't know it was an interwar period. I mean, I think as they got into the later 1930s, they could probably sense it. But just because you don't have a combat patch on your right arm, or you feel like all I'm doing are these exercises, over in Europe or over in the Indo-Pacific, I'm not coming in and like shooting bad guys in the face, or maybe I got a taste of Afghanistan. I wasn't happy about how that ended. And now I'm in this, ambiguous situation where we just have to be ready for whatever happens. I definitely sense the frustration with that a lot with like my captain kind of E7-ish population who came in when we were still heavily involved in the war on terror. And now they're hitting that 10-year mark and deciding, is this something I want to sign up for another decade when I don't know what it is? And I try to encourage them, look back through history, see that there's always been time periods where there's lulls. And thank God we're not constantly at war, because it's atrocious and also another thing that's not sustainable. But when the time comes, I mean, we're going to need good leaders who've been training, who've been learning, trying to educate themselves. And the Army is always going to have to grow in a time of conflict, right? So if we're shrinking right now to this kind of leaner, meaner Army, and we need good people to stay in. So that's what I try to encourage them on. Obviously, everyone's going to make their own decision about getting out. And with that, one of my biggest kind of mentor bullets I've been hitting lately is having job diversification as well. So a lot of our captains that have come to 7th Group are all super talented, but a lot of them went, from Ranger Regiment into here, or they, did something with JSOC maybe, or they're branch detailed and coming into here. And then they all want to go do another SOF assignment on the back end, whether it's with a special mission unit, maybe going back to Ranger Regiment, JSOC, something like that, which is all well and good because they've developed a lot of good, unique skill sets. But look at what the peers of ours are doing, at least in the intel field. I can't really speak to other branches, are doing out on the conventional force. They're hitting CTCs, they're hitting war fighters, they're doing all of this stuff with like new equipment, innovating in all those different ways. One, just in terms of like promotion and competing for future jobs, there are some things you miss out on the soft side that the conventional force has been really leaning into LISCO on, that we just need to be cognizant of. And two, if you do want to be a field grade, like you need to be prepared to be a brigade S2. Like that is kind of the foundational job that we have. Yes, you could go to INSCOM and be an MI battalion S3 or XO, but I'm kind of the mindset like we're twos, and at least that's the track that my passion lies within. So if you've been in kind of like a soft, direct action, intel support type role your whole career, do you know how to do intelligence preparation of the operating environment? Do you know how to do that yourself? One. And two, do you know how to lead a team through that? Because those are two very different things. And where the military intelligence, bulwark was when I went through, was still kind of counterterrorism focused. We were getting into hybrid threat, but I didn't feel like I walked away from that, knowing how to do what was intelligence preparation of the battlefield back then before we updated doctrine last year. The Rangers taught me targeting, but it wasn't until I went to the maneuver career course and got like the best IPD class I've ever had from an infantry captain who was my company phase instructor. So like I really got it. And then it was just those repeated sets and reps in the 173rd that made me very proficient in it, to where if you handed me a division op board, I could go through with like a small team and I could give you an Annex B at the brigade level. I could give you an Annex L at the brigade level. And what I worry that as people kind of get into, their little niches across the Army, whether they stay in INSCOM, they stay in FORCECOM, or they stay in SOF on the intel side, is you're not developing kind of that basic skill set that you need to have of being able to provide battlefield visualization and predictive analysis for commanders. So that's a drum I'm sure all the captains here are sick of me beating. We need to look at where the Army is going, and if we get into a World War II type scenario, like our intel officers need to be able to do that full breadth of intelligence analysis. And sometimes on the soft side, you just don't get into as deep of that. So that's, an area I'm excited about for the future. I think there's a lot of great opportunities and things that we're building within our Army right now that like hopefully we're never going to have to use in combat. We need to keep training and being ready for it. And I feel as a field grade now, my loyalty is definitely to the Army as an institution in a way that, it wasn't as a company grade officer. Like I kind of am they right now, as you've said. So my responsibility is developing those officers for what is best for the Army. What might be best for them personally is the satisfaction they get staying on a soft track. But what's best for the Army is me making sure that any captain who leaves 7th Group after their time, at least while I'm here, is on par with their conventional peers and like can compete in those promotion boards, can compete for those jobs, so that, those brigade commanders doesn't get somebody who shows up and isn't proficient. Because when I was a lieutenant, it was when all the brigade S2s were getting fired across the Army. That happened effectively to me in 2nd Brigade of the 101st with our brigade S2. He kind of just got sidelined and told, you'll just go advise the Afghans. And then it was a branch detailed captain who'd been an infantry officer literally just came from the MI captain's career course, and he found himself as the brigade S2 in Afghanistan for a while. Not the ideal situation. So that for me is what I feel like my charge is right now in terms of mentoring within the MI branch down here.
I like the term of diversity, or like trying a lot of different things. I wasn't 100% sure of it when I was first, like, I was a light infantry officer. I was a ranger. I was a paratrooper. I was like, love the light infantry. You had to go light to mech to striker. I stayed light. I was a paratrooper my whole career. My first 20 years in the Army, like I had never been outside of an airborne infantry battalion. Never. Not once. When I went to the cavalry leaders course before I became the reconnaissance squadron, it changed the way I looked at targeting and collecting intelligence forever. And I thought I knew what I was doing from the Ranger Regiment and targeting. Yeah, but it was very precise. It changed everything about the way I saw PIRs and answering the questions for the brigade commander as a Cav squadron commander. It was game changing, and that was all those years later in my career. So I couldn't agree with that more on a professional side. On a more personal side, when you go and you have a lot of these different experiences and a lot of different things, it reminded me of Abrams Charter. Yeah, it was something that was up on the wall when I first grew up in the Rangers. And then when I was first a junior officer, it was like, yeah, we got this thing called Abrams Charter. And then the NCOs started doing it, and they started going off to the big army. We called it the big army, the conventional army, whatever it is. It's just the army. All soldiers are entitled to outstanding leadership. All soldiers deserve to be inspired, and they deserve phenomenal leaders from all types of units around the world, right? Because when you show people and you inspire people that are out there, now they get to see it. They get to think about, like, oh my goodness, this is a game changer. I've got somebody that came in here that taught me how to do PT, showed me how to be healthy, showed me how to be a professional, showed me how to wear my uniform, showed me how to use my gear. And then what you end up doing is in the most unexpected areas, you start to find the future of our Army. You start to find these people in these places that you didn't think you would. Junior NCOs, young officers. That's how you found your way into 3rd Ranger Battalion, right? Was in a BSB on Rear D. That's where you found your way. That's how you found your way in, and somebody finds your way. So you go out there and you find somebody, and they're like, and we've all heard the stories about, like, I never thought I was capable of something like that until somebody that inspired me and said, hey, I think you'd be a real good this. And then all of a sudden, off you go. And we've all had somebody in our career that made an opportunity. I didn't think becoming an officer was even a possibility. I never joined the Army thinking that was something I would do. But then people started talking to me about green and gold. And Joe Votel started talking to me about becoming an officer. And I was like, I didn't think that any way, shape, or form I was going to be able to be an officer. And they put that idea in your head, and then here we are all these years later. So when you go out to these other units and you get to change somebody's life forever, that's what it's all about. That's what's got me going. That's what's got me charged, and making people believe that they can have a better life in the Army. They can have a better life outside the Army than what they're doing right now. It's 1% better every single day. It's a little bit of no days off, and that's what's got me super duper fired up right now. What have you been kind of holding back on us this whole time, or me, that we haven't already kind of talked about so far?
I guess on that, I'm just really happy. Like, the Chief of Staff of the Army has the Harding Project going right now. I've been maybe byproduct of being a history major and having to write a lot of papers. I really enjoy writing. I think it's a lost art within our Army. We even struggle to write emails well nowadays with just basic, like, grammar, punctuation, getting your bottom line up front. So I was really excited to see that project launched. And, we'd been in the thought to action business for a couple of years at that point. And it's just a healthy and kind of cathartic habit, I guess, just being able to write about your experiences in the Army thus far, reflect on what you've learned, where you've come from, where you've been, where you want to go. So I guess for anybody who's listening that, maybe has a desire to get into writing, our platform is always looking for guest contributors, even if it's just a one-time thing. Part of why we started it too is we just felt that a lot of the more distinguished Army publications, whether they're the branch journals or some of these strictly online platforms, there is a bit of a threshold for the stuff that they'll publish, which is all well and good because we need to have, some level of sophisticated academic peer-reviewed stuff. But if you're somebody who just wants to put a reflective piece of writing out there, there shouldn't be a whole lot of barriers or hoops that you have to jump through. So we definitely know we're a couple tiers down from some of those other publications, which is fine. This is really just a project for us. And luckily some people have latched on to follow it, but it's been really good in just helping me personally, at least, like cement my ideas and experiences from being a company grade officer. What type of leader do I want to be as a field grade? And then how do I just continue to reflect on what's happening in my life, the world around me, the Army writ large? And it's made me a better writer, to be honest, like not only sitting down and doing my own pieces, but having to edit those of my co-contributors. So I'm glad we're just at a point that writing is kind of undergoing a bit of a renaissance in the Army right now. And like I said, we've had to adjust and kind of scale back as Katie jobs and life get in the way. My one co-founder is in Poland right now. The other is back in DC. We've got writers in Hawaii. We had, somebody else that was over in Germany. So things like that happen. And, the good thing about being kind of a startup type publication is we're only hard on ourselves. The only people expecting us to publish on a certain date are ourselves. So with that, if there's anybody who has something that they want to put out there that maybe they think wouldn't quite meet the threshold for like a Modern War Institute or from the Green Notebook or something like that, we are definitely open to guest contributions for anybody who has a desire to just try to put their thoughts out there.
The last thing I want you to kind of talk about is what you want people to think, the people that serve for you, the people that you've served with. You want them to think when they hear your name, whether it's they see it in print, they see it at the bottom of an article, or they see it at the top of a podcast, or they see it on social media or something. They see your name, they hear your name, they hear somebody say your name, and what would that be? But before that, I just want to say thanks for you, because you don't realize the effect that you have on other people. When I was a battalion XO, do you know how reassuring it is to know that your S2 knows what she's doing and is being effective, and the people that work for her are happy, they're proud, they know that they can be trusted. It's so comforting to know that the people that work with you and for you are competent, unquestioning character, and unquestioning commitment to what it is that we do. It's so comforting, because then now we can have much graduate level discussions. We can talk about leadership. We can talk about much more important things. Or I can do what I'm being asked to do as the battalion XO, or as the battalion commander, or as the brigade commander. I can focus on what I'm being expected to do, because that's hard enough. It's hard enough to do what you're being asked to do and not have to wonder if the people that work with you or around you are treating their people with dignity and respect, and are taking care of their soldiers, and are mentoring them and helping them get their next job, and helping them, asking them to go talk to their mom and dad, and doing these things. And so thanks for being that for all the people that are in our Army just on a daily basis. 2, for putting it out in writing and sharing it with many more people, and then having the guts to put yourself out there and share things. You're sharing things on social media. You're sharing things on the internet. You're putting yourself out there on podcasts and trying and standing up thoughts for action. You're doing more than your share of the task. One of the greatest, compliments that you can possibly get is that when someone says they want you to be a part of their team, and they want to be on a team that you're a part of. And every team that you've been a part of has been absolutely blessed to have you on that team. And from somebody that's a dad that has a son that's in the Army, that's in the 101st, and a daughter that's heading off to West Point, I am absolutely comforted to know that as a parent, that they're going to go out there into our Army that's going to be led by people like you, and that people like you are going to make sure that Brady and Ryan are taken care of. And if they're not, they're going to absolutely squash it in the leaders that they have that are under them, that to say that you better be ready when these people come out to the Army to lead them with character, lead with competence, and lead with absolute commitment. So thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm the absolute biggest beneficiary of all of these podcasts, is that because I've gotten 2 hours of undivided attention from you, and I know you prepared. I know you came in ready for this, and so what are those things like? What do you want people that you have worked for, people that have been on your left and right, they're your teammates, And sometimes, most importantly, the people that work for you, around you, your teammates, the people that have had you as a leader. What do you want them to feel when they hear your name?
Oh, well, first, just thanks for, kind of your vote of confidence and everything, sir. I lucked out a lot in First Rock, with you and then Colonel Shaw and then Major David Hearn coming after you, who both of whom remain great mentors to this day. Yeah, I'd say, hopefully people think I've got a strong moral compass that's really informed by my faith, and that I live my faith, at work and off work, that I'm a good teammate. I'm serious when we need to be serious, but also like to have fun and make sure it's an enjoyable work environment, and that I'm technically and tactically proficient in my job. I'm able to think critically, take things off of other people's plates, and just kind of give that reassurance when I'm in a room or on a project that I will give my best, my team will give their best. And I think at this point in my career, it's less about me. It's more of, what can my S2 section do? What can the Intel Warfighting Function and 7th Group do? That's where I derive more pride and satisfaction than anything I may or may not do personally.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts, and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes, and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.